On the 27th of October 1916, the Salcombe Lifeboat went to the aid of a wrecked schooner, only to find that all the men on board had already been rescued.
In the early hours, severe southerly gales and heavy seas were pounding this part of the South Devon coast. The small town of Salcombe suffered a terrible loss when their lifeboat capsized and 13 men from the town were drowned.
Up here at the Prawle Point Coast Guard lookout, it had been a foul, squally night, and extra men had been drafted in for foul weather watch. At 5:12 in the morning, Chief Officer May saw a large blue light, which was a known signal of distress, over Langaston Point, maybe half a mile away. So he quickly sent a man to the cottages down there to rouse the rest of the Coast Guard crew, and sent another to send a telephone message to Salcombe as follows: Chief Officer Prawle to Senior Officer Salcombe, signal of distress on Meg Rock, Langaston Point. May quickly signalled from here with another blue light to show the men down there that they'd been spotted and that help would be on its way. He then ran down this steep slope and along the beach to Langaston Point, and there he found the topsail schooner Western Lass from Plymouth stranded on a sandy cove just west of Meg Rock. They were lucky, it was the only bit of sand in the whole vicinity. But heavy waves were crashing over the schooner. Unfortunately, there was a fault on the phone line, and so it took more than an hour to get the message through to Salcombe Lifeboat. Meanwhile, there was also a fault on the line to East Prawle, so May sent a man to East Prawle to fetch the volunteers of the East Prawle Life-Saving Apparatus Company. They came along with their rocket apparatus, and from Langaston Point they quickly fired a rocket straight over the schooner, trailing behind it a very fine line, the whip line. The men on deck pulled it in, and behind it pulled in the hawser, which they anchored on board, and then one by one, in a breeches buoy, they were hauled ashore until the last man came ashore at 6:52 a.m.
The lifeboat had launched at 6:50 a.m, just 1 hour after the distress call had been received in Salcombe. But just 2 minutes before, the whole crew of the Western Lass had actually been rescued by the Coast Guard.
In Salcombe, the Coast Guard at the watch house sent a message to the coxswain to summon the lifeboat crew. One of them was a young lad called Eddie Distin.
There was a bang on the door and the coxswain shouted, "There's a ship ashore at Prawle. The boat's wanted." "Rise and shine, Eddie." Well, I got dressed, then ran out to the boathouse at South Sands. It was getting daylight, a right rough old morning, squally rain and blowing a full gale. When we got there, we got rigged in our oilskins and life jackets.
The crew must have seen and heard the waves breaking over the bar as they made their way here to the boathouse on South Sands. Meanwhile, the watchers on the shore were terrified that they'd never get out over the bar. The Salcombe Bar is a spit of sand that extends right across the mouth of the estuary, just below the water level, and it makes access to and from the harbour really dangerous under some weather conditions.
"Do you think you'll get her out over the bar, skipper?" Sam replied, "No trouble, and it'll be a fair wind once we're over. Just you wait and see."
Many of the young men from Salcombe were already serving in the trenches during the Great War, so the lifeboat crew was made mostly of older men.
You needed about 20 launches to get the boat out of the house, down the slip and across the sand into deep water. 'Twas high water that morning, and an easy launch. We were away quickly.
The William and Emma would have been very similar to this, which is Hard work rowing at the best of times, but on that fateful morning there was a strong southwesterly wind blowing about 50 miles per hour and huge seas hurling themselves over the bar, propelling a boat with a laden weight of 6¼ tons required a supreme effort from the crew, and each oar alone weighed 25 pounds. Two of the crew, James Canham and Ashley Cook, were only 5'6" tall, and Cook only weighed 9 stone. Collectively, those 12 oarsmen must have possessed colossal strength. The William and Emma's oars were painted white on the port side and blue on the starboard, and the reason for that was that the rudder was ineffective at maximum rowing speed. So the coxswain would have called, pull on the whites and back on the blues in order to turn to starboard to face into the waves. When she was lined up, the 12 oarsmen took their timing from the starboard stroke and perfectly together fired the boat into the maelstrom of the surf. They all knew that one bad stroke or one caught oar would turn the boat broadside into the waves and she could be lost. With a full crew and all her equipment on board, the William and Emma was hauled down the slipway and into the water by the launch team. This was despite the big waves that were looping round from the bar and actually hitting the small beach. Her water ballast tanks were full and each man wore his life jacket. News of the launch spread quickly through the town, and soon people were gathered along the path between South Sands, Eelstone and Bolt Head, and they watched the lifeboat battle its way over the bar and out towards the relative safety of the waters of the range beyond.
There was never any hesitation about our ability to get over the bar. But we knew we could do that all right. We did. The boat, as a matter of fact, went out splendidly, though a little jumpily, because there was no doubt about it, a very nasty sea. I've been going out in the lifeboat 18 or 19 years, and I don't remember any such weather.
We're going to retrace the course on that fateful morning on the 27th of October in 1916. Today on this modern all-weather lifeboat, it's only going to take us about 7 minutes to get to Langaston Point, where the Western Lass ran aground. For the lifeboat crew then, it would have taken about an hour even to row to Prawl Point, and that's with the aid of sails and the wind at their back. This is Prawl Point behind us there, you can see it on the chart. And in a storm is a treacherous and exposed place, and volunteers still keep watch at Prawl Point even today. And the Coast Guard, having rescued the crew of the Western Lass, would have actually seen the lifeboat coming round the corner out of Salcombe and heading towards the point.
Chief Officer May recalled at the time the wind was blowing within a few points of a hurricane. The boat was splendidly handled and was going like a greyhound and riding the waves beautifully. I had no days signalled by which I could acquaint the boat that her services were not required. Had the incident happened at night, I could have shown a green light. I did think of using semaphore, but came to the conclusion that none of the members would understand this method of signalling. Sometime later, my attention was again called to the boat, and I realised she'd seen that she wasn't wanted.
On rounding Prawl, we saw the vessel in distress, a topsail schooner. There was too much sea for us to get near the vessel, and we couldn't see anyone on board. The sea had been getting worse while we'd been out, and we could see we couldn't do anything. We hung around for a while, then the skipper said, "That's it, let's go home."
To return home, the crew had to sail straight into the teeth of the gale, which meant they had to tack like this to get round the point here, and again Chief Officer May recalled afterwards, after a short tack to the southward, the lifeboat turned back and headed about northwest, perhaps a little of the windward of northwest. She would not weather Prawl Point on the second tack, but on the third, when it was about 8:25, she did so, and she made long legs for home.
As we sailed homeward, the sea got worse, and we all got pretty wet from the heavy seas breaking over us. Some of the crew suggested, as we neared Salcombe, the advisability of not attempting to cross the bar. But the majority had confidence that the lifeboat would prove equal to carrying us over. And as we were all, moreover, wet, had very little money in our pockets, and anxious to get home, now so near, the verdict was given in favour of returning over the bar to Salcombe. We saw, of course, how badly the sea was breaking over the bar, and realised that we should have need of all our seamanship to carry us over. The coxswain said, "We'll get her across a bit. She will go in. She's bound to go in. Never fear." Then he said, "Lower away the mainsail." We took in the sails and put out the drone, and were in the act of unshipping the mast and getting the oars out for the pulling when a tremendous sea struck.
A mountainous wave reared up behind them. It lifted up the stern and pitch-poled the whole lifeboat, stern over bow. The crew, all wrapped in stout oilskins and wearing life belts, were thrown into the boiling surf. Most of them managed to get back to the upturned hull and grip onto hand battens and lifelines. But as they did so, more waves hit them and they were washed off the hull. And this happened again and again.
I managed to grab and help a chum back. The coxswain looked at me and asked me what I thought of our chances. And I told him, not much. And then we were all swept into the sea again.
And there were just 2 survivors. Eddie Distin and Bill Johnson miraculously managed to make it ashore and were picked up at this point here that's known locally as Jones's Wall.
Up here at Prawl Point, Chief Officer May actually saw the capsize, so he quickly gathered rescue lines and other equipment and with 2 men set off along the coast path, hoping to be able to rescue somebody. They went 2.5 miles past Garrow Rock until they came to Jones Wall, and there they saw Eddie Distin and Bill Johnson clinging to a rock about 40 feet offshore.
I remembered nothing after we were all swept into the sea again, until I found myself on a rock, some little distance from the shore, with Eddie Distin on another a few feet off.
I was washed up on a rock near Jones's Wall, but clear of the mainland. And there was Bill Johnson. I hadn't seen him in the water, and there we were, side by side.
The waves broke over the rock and swished and swirled round it. But somehow, I managed to hold on.
We hung on to that rock like grim death, because the sea was trying to wash us off again.
Meanwhile, the 2 survivors had also been spotted by the Salcombe rescue party, who'd come along the cliff path from East Portsmouth. They saw the men clinging to this rock and a great surging mass of water between them and the shore. They realised it wasn't going to be easy to get them off. Tom Perrott, who is a professional yachtsman and fisherman, took charge of the throwing lines. He managed to scramble down the cliff to the edge and throw a line to Eddie Distin.
Bill and I were very lucky. We were the only ones to be saved. Some of the bodies were washed ashore the same day. Some later. 2 were never found.
Some of the crew were washed up near the bar, others as far away as Kingsbridge. But the bodies of James Cove and William Lamble were never found. As the extent of the disaster became clear, the small, tight-knit community of Salcombe was plunged into a state of shock. No one could remember when so much sorrow had come into so many homes in one blow. The local newspaper described Salcombe as a town in mourning.
And 13 lives were lost there.